Hello everyone, my name is Andrew. Today we continue learning Django and today we'll talk about services. How to write them in Django in particular. So let's start. Once again, today we'll talk about business logic and services in Django. Sorry. If you don't know anything about services, then I suggest you to watch my 10 most common mistakes video in Django. So I have a video where I explain what are the 10 most common mistakes in Django, and one of the parts of that video are services. But basically, I'm gonna refresh your mind and quickly explain services once again. So imagine that you have an app in Django, of course, and I think it goes without saying that you should be able to program in Django in order to talk about services, because that topic is much more advanced. So we have an application called products in my Django YouTube application, and then we have product and product type models. So we go to views, and if you want to have a view that, for example, creates our product, so a view called define create product view. It doesn't matter that I use a function and not a class-based view in Django. We use some render, so we return something, we render a response, and then what we do in most cases, or what some people do, because I never do that, is we use product objects create. So product objects create, we use request get or request post, something like that. So we use our model directly. However, that is really bad, because in Django we should have different layers. So in any architecture, actually, we should have different layers in any program. So if we talk about Django in particular, or any web framework in Python, we should at least have 3 layers. Our views that are responsible for request-response interaction. So views are only responsible for getting your requests, doing something with your requests, and returning your responses. Then we're going to have something like serializers. So they serialize your data, they get your data from raw JSON and put it in Python objects, but we're not going to talk about that in normal Django because that is done for us. Then you have your database layer, which is your database, our models, and then we have our services. And services is our objects, classes, functions, it depends. Now we're going to talk about what are those services, functions, methods, or what are services. So how should we write them? Basically, a service is a thing. It's a thing that allows you to execute your logic. Because once again, our view is only responsible for request-response interaction. The logic inside of that view is not existent. So the logic is nothing actually. So what we do in services is we have something like a function or a class or a module, anything. We're going to talk about how to write services right now, but we have something, for example, create product, that accepts the data. So imagine that we need to create product, and if we go to models.py, I have title and manufacturer, but let's use title and price. So we're only going to put those fields. So we use variables here, title, price, and then I use product objects create inside of here. Once again, if you don't get anything, wait a minute and you understand what I'm doing here. Title is title, price is price. And then we can return that product. So instead of just creating that product inside of my view, I'm going to use create product function, create product. I'm going to import it from my services and put some data inside of here. So it doesn't matter what data I put. So for example, title is going to be request post get title, something like that. It doesn't matter what the code is, because that's just a dummy for you to understand that we need to create services, because services use your logic. So that is business logic, all the logic that your program needs to execute. For example, if we create a product, we may need to check that price is positive. So that logic goes here. If price is greater than 0, then we create the product, but if price is less or equal to 0, we, for example, raise value error. So we show that there is an error. All that logic, all the interactions with our databases, with our media, with our, auxiliary services, with our microservices go inside of services. So service is your logic. Views are only responsible for your request-response interaction. Once again, if you don't get what I'm saying, just go to the other video and look at it there, because I have tons of videos on services. And that is the simplest architecture that we can use. So we don't use our models or any other thing directly inside of our views. We use services that have our models and then return some useful data. So for example, here we can return our newly created product and say product is create product, and then put it in our view, in our response or in our template, anywhere we want. And basically that's the whole idea of services. Why do we need it? Because basically that is much easier for you to, write your code. That's the first idea. And the second idea is that if you have different layers for different ideas and responsibilities, so different layers have different responsibilities in your software, it's much easier for you to update that software. So imagine once again, we need to check that our title has at least 3 characters. If we do that in a view, so if we create our product in a view, we need to modify our view. We need to modify that function or that class. That is really bad because that means that our views have multiple responsibilities. And why is it bad? Because we need to modify a thing that is responsible for request-response interaction. However, we do not modify our request or our response interactions at all. The only thing that we modify is our business logic. So it's just easier. Imagine that we need to, right now, imagine that we need to add our check. So the length of our title is greater than 0. What do? I don't even open my views.py file. I go directly to services and I do something like that. If length from title is greater than 0, then create our project, or if it's less than 0, then raise value error. Once again, it can be anything, any logic. That's just an example. So if something happens, raise value error. I didn't even open my views.py. I didn't even open it. Of course, sometimes you need to open it to handle that error, do something else, but that's the whole idea. You split responsibilities to update your software and maintain your code in a simpler and even more fashionable way. Yeah, because that just looks better. Just trust me, that looks better than just using product objects create or any other thing inside of your views. So basically, you need to get all of your logic, all of your interactions, and put them inside services.py, inside different modules, inside different folders, inside different applications. But basically, that's the whole idea of services. Now let's talk about how we should write our services, because, okay, so that's the idea of services. I explained it in other videos, but how do we write them? So imagine that you need to start your services. What do you have? You have an application that queries your data, updates your data, deletes your data, creates your data, gets your whole data, does some inner joins, gets your data with pagination. How do you implement that with services? Because you should never use product objects create, product objects get, filter, delete, update, or any other product objects or your model related activity inside of your views. But how do you implement it in services in a very maintainable way? So I want to explain you my history with services because I started writing them and I had no guide to look to, because those services are not like any other architecture. Services for Django are really unique in the sense that lots of people don't use them, and Django itself is not accustomed to services. So if you look at Django REST framework, for example, that's a very popular framework, and I'm pretty sure that if you worked with Django, you used that before. If you look at that module, so Django REST framework, DRF, you can see that your serializers, for example, they don't support services. Your views don't support services. Your APIs don't support services. In Django itself, when we look at Django, we have, for example, I don't know if I have it here, but let's see. No, I don't have it, so that's a login view. But basically in Django, we have lots of things that require you to put your model right away. They do not require you to put a service that is gonna be used with your model. They require you to put your model right away. And that is really, really bad. So what I suggest is that all the pre-installed things, Django views, like Django class-based views for authorization, Django class-based views for detail view, so all those things, pre-installed things, should directly use your model. So if you have something like, let me give you an example. So if you have something like class product detail view that inherits detail view, and that's a thing from Django, and it requires you to put your model. Don't be smart about it, just put your product right here. However, there is a difference. When you write your own code, for example, in detail view, we have a thing called, define get object. Your get object is the thing that gets your object. So product detail view is a class that will get one object and show you that detailed view. So you have a list of items, for example, and you click on an item and it opens that product detail view. Get object should never use something like return product objects get. So your whole interaction, your whole code should only use services. However, if you have something pre-installed as like model is something or something is something, just use your models right away. So you can use your models, but once you use dot something, that is really bad. That's what I'm trying to say here. So how do we write our services? That's the first idea, is that if you have something pre-installed and you just need to use your model name, use your model name. But if you have your own queries like get, filter, update, delete, you should use services. Now let's go to our services. How do we implement them? Well, once again, let me tell you my story. So how I did that myself. Once I heard about services, and I heard about them from other applications. I heard about them from C#. So I was starting with C# and I thought, well, C# has entities, C# has services, C# has all that business logic. Why don't we implement that in Python? And then I looked around the internet and I only found like 2 or 3 sources out of millions of sources that were about Django. So what did I do? I implemented them myself. There were no guides for the services. And my first idea was to simply implement a function that is gonna execute that logic and give me what I need. So if you look at our product detail view, what we need here is define get product function. Just a simple get product function. So what does it do? It, let's say that we use some private key or some ID. So pk and ID are pretty similar in Django, but pk is just like always use pk. It's primary key. That's the whole word. So pk is an abbreviation. Imagine that we use pk and we put something like self quarks pk. So quarks are the things that we put in our URL. Like we can say, I don't know, website.com/product/1, and 1 is going to be our pk. So basically we provide our primary key inside of there. That was my initial code. I do not know anything about the services, and now let's refactor it. So my initial idea was to create a function getProduct that accepts our primary key as an integer, for example, and then returns product objects get pk is pk. And that's better, because now what I can do is use get product like this, import it from my services, and now I have a pretty maintainable, well, nothing really fancy here, we just get our product. But that was my first idea. So I rewrote all my functions, like create, update, delete. I'm only going to show you 1 or 2 functions to be simple here. But I rewrote all my functions for creation, update, deletion, all that, inside of my services, inside of simple functions. But then I looked at my application. I looked at it. And what do you think was the problem? Well, the problem is that I had similar functions. They did the same job, but they were named differently. So I had getProduct, then getUser, and get pk integer, and the only thing that changed is my return user.objects.get pk is pk. So basically, I had millions of functions inside of different applications like products, users, information, analytics, shop, friends, or any other application. And I had different models called the same, used the same, or different models were used in the same functions that really had different name. So you can see those functions are similar, getProduct and getUser. The only thing that changes is that user. Everything else aside from the name is the same. So I thought to myself, okay, so I have filter, get, update, delete, and the only thing that changes are the names of my functions and the models used in them. Why can't I use a common function, a common interface, a common thing that will have all the characteristics of those functions, but will work with any model? So that is why I came to common services. So what is a common service? Common service is basically a service that is used in your whole application. Because getProduct, getUser, or any other service should only be used when we really need our getUser or getProduct. So when we work with our product or we work with our user. But common services can be called with any model, they can be called with any query set, any objects, or anything else. Common services are just common for your application. So I had an application called common, and I created my services.py file. I usually have something like common or core, and that application in Django serves as an application that combines all the base mixins, all the base views, all the things that I need throughout my whole application. So for example, if I have a model in products, I cannot really use it directly in users. I can use it through services, but I cannot use the model directly. Well, maybe I can use it for foreign keys, but what you need to understand in Django is that your application should be self-sustainable. Because if your application is self-sustainable, just as a start, for example, if you're going to need to split that application, split your whole Django monolith into different microservices, so your products is going to work on a different computer, your users is going to work on a different computer, and so on and so on and so on. I have a video on microservices, so you can watch it if you don't get what I'm saying. But basically, your application should have everything that it needs. The same goes for users, the same goes for any other application. And common is an application in my case that contains all the things that I need throughout my whole Django project, not my application. So basically, I created common services.py, and there I had something like this: get object, model, pk. Then I had filter objects, model, queued arguments. So quarks, if you don't know, are the queued arguments in Python. I have a video on them. I'm not going to explain them here, not to waste your time. And let's change it to quarks here. So what I did, instead of doing get product and get user, I basically called them like this: get object from product, and something, for example, like title is hello. And inside of get object, I did this: return model objects filter from queued arguments. And the same, or sorry, not filter, but get from queued arguments and filter here. So as you can see, those functions are somewhat different, and they are going to be different once you develop your application. But basically, I had a function for get, function for filter, update, delete, all those things, all the common ideas in my application. And that is really, really important, because you should not only put the functions that you use that are related to your ORM, to your database. You should put all the functions that are common throughout your application. So for example, if you have a function or a service that opens a file, saves that file with a different name, then does something to connect that file to your database, then has something to send an email to some other thing, and you use that and use those features throughout your whole application, that should be a common service. If you have a function or a class that is used to send emails, that should be a common service. If you have something that uses one service, that should be, or uses some cloud service, or uses some other API, some external thing, external application, external environment, or anything else, that should be a common service. So common services are not only related to database interactions, they're related to your common logic. I'm just going to show them with database interactions because that's easier. But most typically, you're going to have services for database interaction, because common services, because in 99% of the cases, that's why you use Django, to use database, to use code that can be run. Because without database, Django is not that powerful. I mean, it is powerful, but database brings a lot. So 99% of applications, maybe even 100 right now, use databases with Django. So that's how it works. And you're going to have something that is used to filter, create, update, or delete your models. So that's the first idea that came to my mind. Use get object from product or get object from user. And once again, you just import the user and you use that function wherever you want. However, then there was a problem. So let me give you an example. I had something like define create product. Once again, that service. And by the way, services can use other services altogether. So I can call filter objects from here. It's not a problem. But basically, I had a service, something like create product. It has title, so title string, and then what I needed to do is I needed to filter through all my products. Title is title, or something like filter objects, yeah, or we need to call all objects. So I need to get all of my objects. Let me quickly write that new service, all objects, model, and we basically return model objects all. So that was my service. So I needed to go through all of my objects, so all products, and like this, and then do something like that. I needed to filter all of my products, filter, and say something like title is title. So for some reason, you should not. That's just a stupid example because you can use filter objects to filter it right away. But for some reason, I needed all of my products, and then I needed to filter through them. So for some stupid reason, okay? What's the problem here? The problem is that we still call filter function like that, but we should call filter objects. Why is it so important? Because lots of people, well, let me give you an example that I had. I hated using logs. So logs or logging is it's not amusing to me. Like coding is really amusing. I love it. I can do it all day. But with things like logging, the only thing that you really do in logging is you basically go through your files, go through your functions, go through your classes and put logger.info, logger.error, logger.message or something like that. So I hated logging. However, I had those common interfaces. So what I basically do every time I create those interfaces, I do something like that. Logger.info and then something like get all objects. So I put, of course, the messages are different. Like here it's filter objects. I can put the model, so model and then cute arguments. Model filtered with cute arguments. So what I can do is put logging functions or monitoring functions inside of my common services. And that allows me to have those messages, to have that log every time something happens. So every time I filter my projects, or sorry, my objects, I can see that my log was printed, my log was sent. I can see that that object was filtered with that argument. That object was we got that object, we retrieved that object from the database with those arguments. That is really powerful. For now, I'm just gonna put print in here, but you should understand that that is a log. So print, and I'm gonna put logger.info here. So logs are really useful in those common interfaces, in those common services, because you can put them once and use them throughout your applications. So if you use your common services anywhere, so sorry, everywhere, not anywhere, but everywhere, you will see those logs no matter what. That is really powerful. So basically we get all the products from all objects product, and then we need to filter for them. So that's the problem. I want to use my filter objects because I have one common interface for filtering my models. However, I cannot use it here. Why is that? Because when I use filter objects on all products, like this, it's going to give me an error. Because basically, what we did in our functions is we used model.objects. The thing that is returned from all objects, so if you go here, product, objects, all, we get all the products. That's a query set. That's not a model, that's a query set, the result of the database interaction. Why is it so important? It is important because query set does not have objects. Why am I saying that? We get all the objects here, so all products is a query set, then I go filter here, and you can see here, model.objects. Our query set does not have those objects, so we cannot get something that is not existent. We receive an error. So that is the whole problem with our services, with our common services, is that we use model. Never ever use model inside of your common services, because that's going to be harder for you to interact with. So it's going to be really not maintainable. Because right now, we either should use all products.filter, so the thing that we are not supposed to use, because we have a common interface for filtering. Why should we abandon our rules and use .filter? Or we should rewrite our filter objects service. So this function, and this function. And it's always better to rewrite your common services. Well, in that case, not always, but in that case. What do? Instead of using model, we just use objects. Like this, we go right here, we delete this. That's it. That's the only thing you need to do. So instead of using your model, then .objects, then the function, we use objects.function. Why is it so important? Because right now what we can do is use all objects from product.objects right now. The only thing that changes in my services interaction is I put .objects. And as you can see, there is an error, but I recorded that video multiple times, and I know that that error is not really important because that's just from PyCharm. It says that manager doesn't have attribute all, but our manager objects I can call .all, so that's just an error from PyCharm. Nothing to worry about. So basically, instead of using our model, we use objects like this. And that allows us to do much more with our common services than we were able to do before. Because right now, what I can do is I can put product objects, I can put a query set, I can put just one model, I can put different models, I can put different managers, I can put anything I want inside of my service. Every object in my system that implements .filter can be used with that service. That's the whole idea. You should put objects in order to use any objects from Django or RAM, or yeah, it's typically Django RAM. It's typically a good idea to only use that with Django RAM, but you can put any objects from Django or RAM inside of that common service in order to filter your objects or get your all objects or get that object. So that is really powerful. And that's how you write services. So that's the basic service that we have. We receive product objects and then we filter, we create, we delete, we update, or we do whatever we want. That's how it works. Of course, for some functions, it's going to be different. So those are querying functions. They query information, they retrieve data. But we can have something like mutable functions. Sorry, not mutable, but functions that mutate our state, that change our state. Those functions can be, of course, different. It depends on what you're doing. But basically, always try to write your function in a way that you can use it with any common service you want. With any, not common service, but with any common thing that you have in your application. So that's just it. Of course, don't overuse it. Don't make your common functions too complicated, and only use your common functions with the things that you intend them to be used with. So in that case, in filter objects, I want my functions to be used with objects from Django or RAM. Any object, it can be a query set, manager, anything from Django or RAM. What matters is from Django or RAM. I only want to use that specific library, that specific module inside of my filter objects function, and that's what you need to do. I don't want to use some other module that implements .filter, because that's going to be like wacky. I only want to use that with my Django objects, Django or RAM objects. Any object, once again, module, query set, doesn't matter, but only with Django or RAM. That's the idea of common services. However, there is not, that's not everything. Because, okay, we can say that we can create our products. And by the way, you should always implement other services, not only get object, filter object, or all object. I think that goes without saying, but create object, delete object, update object should be there as well. If you have that in your application. If you don't need to update them, of course you don't need them. But basically, now we have very simple queries. On one hand, it's, well, really good, but on the other hand, it's not everything. Because if you watched my other videos on Django, you know that Django is really great for beginners. But on the other hand, Django is really bad for beginners. Because if you write production grade code in Django, you cannot just use Django right away. You need to optimize it as hell. Because Django, by default, it gets your whole table. So if you have something like product objects get, and you only want to use the ID of that project. So if you go to models.py, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 fields. Imagine that I only want to use my title. So I need to display the title of my product. If I say product objects get, Django is going to have title, manufacturer, price, description, product secret ID, and all the other fields included in that query. So that means that if we just run our queries, it's not going to be optimized at all. So that's one problem. Our queries are really simple and we need to optimize them. One way to optimize your query is to use something like .only. .values, .only, values list, so I have a separate video on that. But the idea of my speech is that sometimes you should use auxiliary functions. An auxiliary function is a function that cannot exist by itself. It's like a parasite. Well, it's not a parasite because it helps you. It's like a symbiote. It's like a symbiote. It cannot live without you, and but it helps you, you know? It helps you, but actually, I don't know if symbiotes help you. I mean, yeah, I don't know. It's just a function that cannot exist by itself, an auxiliary function. And what matters here is that you'll probably use those auxiliary functions throughout your application. So for me, I use them all the time, because every time I write my Django query, I know that if I don't use only, prefetch related, select related, once again, I have videos on those, or values, or defer, or any other thing, I know that my query is not going to be optimized. So it's going to be really slow, it's going to be high on memory, high on CPU power, and all that stuff. That's why I use only right away. And that's a really good habit, because you optimize your queries. But what matters here is that if you use only throughout your whole application, once again, you can see that that is really common. That's a common thing throughout your application. You use only here, you use only there, you use only with different models, with different fields. Why is only not an auxiliary service? Why is that? Well, the answer is it should be. But here's the thing. Auxiliary functions should never be separate functions because they are auxiliary. So the first thing that I implemented, once again, we go through my story, through my struggle, is I had something like that. I had common services and I just did only objects, or only fields in that case. Only fields. I had objects, once again, objects, and I had fields. So something like this, only fields. So fields are the only all the fields we need. So as you can see, those are args, so infinite arguments without the name, and objects are the objects that we need to use to only get those fields. So basically, yeah, it's hard to explain, but it's really easy to show you. Only fields, just like that. So we call objects only fields. However, there is a problem, and that problem is really, really, really big. Because once I implemented it, I saw that problem, and it was just horrendous. Basically, what we need to do is we need to use only fields on here, like that. Only, and let's say that we only want to get title and price, for example. We only want to get 2 of those fields. What's the problem here? What do you think? Well, let's say that we need to use select related and prefetch related. Select related, once again, those are auxiliary functions, select related, and prefetch related. So once again here, and prefetch related, like this. Objects only, select related goes here, or sorry, that's only, then we have select related, then we have prefetch related. Okay, that is not needed. Let me quickly change it so you can see it better, like this, so only fields, we say that objects goes here, we say that fields, we need to prefetch something like product type, so the type of our product. Prefetch related is basically inner join in Django, or they're joins, they can be different, but typically they're inner joins, so you relate two tables together. And the prefetch related is, no, let's say just this. Doesn't matter what the values are, because I'm still gonna delete it. What's the problem here? What do you think? Well, the query is not correct, but the other thing is that we cannot say right away that query is correct or not. By the way, we should not use, we should use something like this. So you just use the words. It doesn't matter, but yeah, the query is horrendous. That's what I'm talking about. So basically, we implemented only fields here. Once again, the syntax doesn't matter. We implemented only fields here as a separate function, but it doesn't really work as a separate function. Why is that? Because only fields is auxiliary. That function is only called with other functions. You're not gonna say product objects only. Well, you might say that, but typically you say product objects all only, because that's just easier to read. However, here, look at this. What we do here is we implement only as a separate function. And what does it give us? All auxiliary functions, let's imagine that all of our auxiliary functions are separate. So basically, what we say here, let's look at that query. Imagine you go to your first workplace, or you go to your next workplace, it doesn't matter, and you open up that function. You see, okay, so my teammate wrote this function, create product. Okay, we get all the products, that's pretty simple, and then we prefetch related, we select related from prefetch related objects that only fields are title and price, and we filter objects from all products title. Can you really say what is happening in that query? No, you cannot. Why is that? That is pretty simple, because our queries are inversed. We do not say we filter objects, we only get title and price, we prefetch product type, we use that value in order to do select related or prefetch related. We say prefetch related from select related from only fields title price from filter objects where title is title. That is really, really hard to maintain, because you can't, even now, I cannot really get one of my queries saying. I cannot understand it. And that's why I totally removed the idea of auxiliary functions as separate functions, as separate common services. But what I understood is that what you can do is actually have something like that. Common, well, it's going to be something like services decorators. So let's do it like this, services decorators. So I have a separate file, services decorators. It's going to do something like that. Only objects, or only objects, only fields decorator. You can call them whatever you want, but basically something like that. Function or service function here, then define only fields wrapper that has objects only, which is that by default, and args queued arguments. Actually, only queued arguments, because we don't really use quarks. Okay, and then we do something like that. Service function from objects, queued arguments, dot only, like this. We return our only field wrapper, And that's it. That's just it. Then we go to our common services and we basically do this. Decorate only fields decorator. That's it. That's the only thing that we do. We don't really use it with get because get doesn't support that. So when you use get, you don't have that dot only, but we use it with filter or and other functions that need that decorator or need any other auxiliary function. And what happens here? Instead of this, and let me just comment it out so you can see it later. Instead of this, we use something like that. We say filter objects, title is title, only get my title and price. Why does it work? So let's go to filter objects. Filter objects is a function that is decorated by only fields decorator. So only fields decorator has that wrapper. We call our service function with objects, queued arguments, but our only, so this only equals title and price, does not go to queued arguments. It does not go to filter objects function itself. It goes to only here. Because basically what we're saying is that if we have that only variable inside of our argument list, inside of our function definition, so we have that only, we're saying that this should not go to quarks, should not go to queued arguments. It should only go to this only. And then we're saying call that service function objects quarks without our only, and then dot only from this. So now what I can say is that instead of this, instead of only fields from something something, I can say get all products, only get title and price. And of course I can change it like this. So something like that. Title is title and only get title and price. Compare those two. Just compare them. And if you say that we have prefetch rated, select rated, all that here, what we do with that is we basically create a separate decorator, something like prefetch rated. We apply it to our service function, then we go back and we say something like that. Objects is all products. Our title should be title. We should only get title and price. We should prefetch related. And once again, you can change the names, you can change whatever you want. We should prefetch related product type. And we should select related, I don't know, something like that. And now what we do is instead of using different functions one and another, instead of that how, we just use arguments. Now compare filter objects, filter all products, where title should be title. We only should get title and price. We should prefetch related product type and we should select related this. That is much more readable. Of course, you can change the arguments as you want. You can put objects there. You can put select related as the first thing, but I think that is the best way. You put your objects, you put your filters, you put all your auxiliary functions in there. And you can do whatever you want. You can do pagination. So pagination, you can do anything you want. Actually, anything. You can only get the first element. You can get the last element. You can exclude some things. You can add some things. You can prefetch, select, join, do whatever you want. But decorators are much more powerful than just separate functions for our auxiliary services. That's just it. So create decorators for your services on how you can just easily discover how to do it. So basically only is the decorator that I use throughout my application. The same goes for prefetch related or select related. It's basically the same schema. And you should always put a default value for your decorator. Why is that? Because right now, if I only want to filter through my products, so imagine that I don't want to use only. I just want to filter through my products. Just like that. I only want to filter. I don't want to use only. Like, I'm not about it. What happens is that we go to my only decorator, and our only is nothing by default. So only is not even applied. It's just a function that just hangs there. It's not even applied. Of course, you can use if only is empty, then don't apply it, or else apply it, but that's just the way I do it. If only is not provided, only is empty. So we need to get all the fields, kind of like that. And that's how you write services in Django. I'm not going to tell you about classes. You should never use classes in Django as far as I'm concerned, because, I mean, you should use them, but not in services, because I tried it and it was just horrendous. I'm not going to explain all of that, and if you want an explanation on why you should never use classes as services, just write it down in the comments. But basically, it's really, really hard to maintain, it's really, really hard to expose them to other applications. And that's just it. That's the way to write perfect services in Django. You have common services that use all your common operations, not only with ORM, but your common logic. Then you have auxiliary common services that show auxiliary logic to your common services. And by the way, you should never use something like only if use decorator here. You should only use them on common services. So create product is just a function that is being called that uses common services if needed. Then common services use decorators, and those decorators apply auxiliary functions that help your common functions do some logic to use your service itself from some application. And that's just the way it is. And of course, we only use services inside of our views. Once again, you should never ever think of services as just an ORM query, because here those are ORM queries. Just get something, filter something, delete something, update something. Service is your whole logic. So if you have a service, which you need to do in a product detail view, for example, what you need to do is just call that service, expect some result, expect that service to use all the logic, and then return that result. That's the only thing that you should use, you should expect from your service. But that's just it. So let's see how much time I spend. 40 minutes, a lot. But thank you for watching. My name is Andrew. That's how I write services in Django. If you have questions or suggestions, write it down in the comments. Thank you for watching, and bye-bye.